Thomas Stöckler, I'm with LexisNexis, and Valentin Naidja is with Cloaker. So today you get a very tall German and a very tall Frenchman talking about organic influence. So let me start with a nice cat picture, which doesn't really have anything to do with what we're doing, but I think in general it's always good to start with a cute cat picture when you're talking about social media. Who are we? So I work with LexisNexis, which is part of a larger organization called Relix Group. We're a global organization with now about 30,000 people, and we consist of lots of different businesses, and we're all in the largely in the B2B information processing business. So you get companies like Reed Exhibitions, LexisNexis Risk Solutions, Ascent, Flight Global, Elsevier, Dutch publishing house. And you'll recognize, of course, Reed Travel Exhibitions, the people that organize ATM and WTM and so on. So as part of that group, last year I had the opportunity to work on a project for the Maldives Ministry for Tourism, and I invited some of the other parts of our group to get involved in the project. We ended up running a conference in the Maldives on data-led destination marketing, and so we're still involved with them. I was there last week to meet with the general managers forum of hoteliers in the Maldives, and we were also talking about how to leverage new tools and different approaches when it comes to destination marketing and promotion, not just on the influencer side, but just in general for a place like Maldives. And I think that will resonate with lots of people. You know, you have this dynamic between the destination branding on one side, the location, and then the actual hospitality brands on the other hand. And how do you make that best work? Now, a lot of this is to do with making data work more seamlessly and in a more aggregated way to get better results. And we'll talk a lot about that. So I'll let Valentin introduce himself.
This is kind of nice, actually. So we're going to talk about influencer marketing today. So obviously there's a part that is going to be very technology related, and I'm going to be the geek here. So Cloaker, we're a company from Luxembourg, which is a tiny country of 500,000 people. We put together a platform that is globally recognized. So Gartner, for those who know, recognized us as one of the leaders in our fields. We're 10 global leaders in our field. And what we do is that we look at everything that happens online. So that's going to be going from news websites to websites in general, blogs, forums, and all social media. So we take all this, we listen, and then you can do advanced analytics on it. And after you can do some reporting on it. So we're going to see later on how that relates to influencer marketing.
Before we go into the detail of how we ran our analysis and everything, and maybe before I get to that point, so the actual analysis that we did was on English language and Arabic coverage on social media, but also on traditional media on responsible tourism and sustainable tourism. So what we were trying to do is really map out conversations in that particular space over a given period of time. And we looked at a year's worth of data to then really drill into this and filter out and synthesize key individuals and Twitter handles that touch on that topic, which I think is a very key topic for ATM and obviously in the context of Expo 2020. It's a top issue, anything to do with sustainability. The United Nations have recently launched their Agenda 2030, which is all about sustainable development goals. And I think even in tourism, it's becoming an ever more relevant theme that we will be talking about. But to put things a little bit in a wider context, we had in 2016, I'm based in London, as a German, I was quite affected by Brexit in not such a positive way. I was very surprised. I was even more surprised by Donald Trump being elected US president. And what we're finding now is that, you know, you get this phrase, fake news, being bandied around a lot. And, you know, people talk about post-truth and We're living in very uncertain times and so on. There's a general sense that there's a global crisis of trust. Now, that is something that becomes relevant for the tourism context also when you think of the way in which people get information about travel and the way in which companies try to channel people to pick information from certain places and channels and so on. And increasingly that becomes problematic when people just do not trust the information that they're being given in a wider context, and they move into smaller communities where they know people and they find it much more reliable to get their information from there. That leads to a further disruption in a sense of that entire tourism information gathering and decision-making process, where I think what we want to talk about today, organic influence, can actually start making a difference. Now, in influencer marketing has been a big theme for the last few years, and it's pretty much understood as find people with the largest reach and then pay them some money so they talk about your product, send them to certain destinations and so on. They don't necessarily have to be celebrities like Justin Bieber, but really you want people with an extremely high reach to talk about your product or your service, your location and so on. But when you do that, then you're still operating, I think, in a gray sphere between advertising and marketing, and not really on the PR side, and not really on the side where real decision making on a personal and emotional level is happening. Which is why I think this move to organic influence is quite significant, and it will be driven by these global trends that we're currently seeing. So, very, very briefly, bear with me on this. You're probably familiar with the two parts of the brain, the left brain and the right brain. One is driving rational decision making, and the other one is driving emotions and creativity and so on. That's also something that gets used a lot in PR when people talk about the art and science of PR. Now, what we would be arguing as data people is that you need to bring these two things together. You need to bring the understanding of psychological drivers and so on together with really strong and deep data evidence. The two things together will allow you to build and then execute much more efficient marketing strategies and tactics and so on. But there's a different way of looking at the brain, which is cutting through the different parts of evolutionary biology. And the oldest part of the brain, where people talk about the reptile brain, that's actually where we're making instinctual decisions and emotional decisions. It's not so much in the newer part of the brain, which is this big gray thing. So when you think of making decisions in tourism, when people say, well, I'm really looking for a destination where I can save some money and I get better discounts here and so on, and it's all about value for money, you think in theory that's a rational decision. Ultimately it's not, because real decisions are being made in the gut, and that's why a deeper understanding of this reptile brain thing is actually quite significant. This is something that's taken from recent developments around Brexit and Trump. So on the right you have a visualization of this whole idea of people living in echo chambers where they only listen and talk to people that are like themselves. In political decision making, that leads to a very, very polarized world, of course. But again, the concept behind those filter bubbles and echo chambers are also relevant, I think, for tourism marketing. So when you want to reach people in a certain context, you need to understand where they communicate, in their personal spheres in those contexts. So with regards to responsible tourism, we have some examples for that in a second. So what's critical in this world is really to be much more agile and adept at responding to constant change in the world. When we look at trends in tourism in general, we still have significant growth. It happens in differently mature markets at different speeds. The yellow piece there is Asia Pac, where we see the strongest growth. We can also look at this in terms of global trends, where on the lower axis here, it's the degree of certainty with which something is happening. And then we have the degree of impact on the global economy. And the thing that stands out here is really urbanization as the strongest driver. And it's not just for a place like India, it's generally one of the key trends. We have health, wellness, and well-being as a key trend. We have social trends. And I think these are all things that can feed into this idea of making sustainable tourism work. I will quickly skip this because I think I'm conscious of time a little bit. So this was just a general scene setting of the world we're operating in. And Valentin will now talk a little bit about the tools and the data that we have available. And then from that, we will go into the specific study that we did.
All right, so we just saw that there was a part, like people basically are taking a rational decision for emotional reason, right? So basically, they're going to look at price and all this type of things, but at the same time, there's this element of, oh, I will look good on my picture when I go there, and things that are more emotional that you guys in the travel industry needs to be able to leverage and pick up on. And so where do we find this information? And obviously, this is how people think of social media and the online world in general. It's a bit the pulse of the population. It's very much, it's always passionate, not always for the right reason, online. And the idea is that you have an opportunity here to have a really large sample of the population that you can tap into at any moment and understand what they're feeling right now about a topic. So it's a huge world. So I wanted to make a bit of an analogy here when we're going to look at how a technology can look at these things. And I wanted to make an analogy on basically preparing for influencer marketing is a little bit like preparing an itinerary when you go on holiday. So this is how it looks in my house. So the first step is you're looking for information. And here you have a lot of things talking about the same stuff. And it's very, well, you just trying to get as much information as you can. Then secondly, you're trying to decide where to go and which information to trust and which information to look at and how to make a decision out of this. And 9 times out of 10, the third part of this slide is very true to me. It always ends up in an argument when it should be really like a nice thing to do. And it always takes more time than it should. So technology is here to help and make that process easy for you working in the travel industry when looking for influencers and trying to tap into that huge mother lode of information that is the online world and the digital space. Quick raise of hand. Who is using a platform today to look at what's happening online? Anybody? Okay, so that's 4 people out of thousands. Listening platform, maybe? So trying to tap. So the question was, what kind of platform? The answer is listening platform. So trying to understand what happens online. All right, so 4 people. That is not a lot. So let's try to understand a little bit why this is important. So gathering data. So it's a lot of data. As you can see, I'm sure you've seen lots of visuals that look a little bit like this. You have obviously Pinterest that is very important, especially in your industry. You have Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, Google+. LinkedIn could be important if you operate with B2B business a lot. Overall, there's a huge amount of data everywhere. More importantly, and I'm sure you're seeing this every day, if you go on your Facebook, if you have Facebook or anything else, we tend to always stop on where the image is appealing or when there's a video that looks cool. And more, our attention span just dwindles a lot. And we're trying to look for stuff in 3-4 seconds after we're bored. And it's important for us to be able to appreciate that. And there are a lot of images that are here exactly to convey that type of messages. So the online world, very quickly, is more than 1.8 billion photos every day. That's a lot, 1.8 billion. That's a lot on Twitter, on Instagram as well. I'm sure Instagram for most of you and probably Snapchat more and more are becoming some of the most important channel to go into. So obviously there's a lot of data, a lot of people are communicating, and it's important to listen. So the problem is that it's pretty difficult to do. Why? Because there are a lot of tools. There are a lot of tools that look at lots of different things, and nothing is really organized together. And it's difficult to correlate an information with another. For this, you have some of us, like Cloaker or LexisNexis with NewsDesk, that work together to be able to give you a comprehensive picture of what is happening online. So it's difficult to do because you need to have a process that comes with it. So let's look a little bit at what type of data, and here this next 3 slides are designed to be for you a bit of a how-to on how to make sure that you can have what you need to have to make the proper decisions with online data. So gathering data is important, and you need to look at as much information as possible and make sure that you are as exhaustive as possible. So if you look to the right at this little wheel thing, you have a part of it that is about social media, another part that is about online media. So online media will be corporate websites, review websites, blogs, forums, news websites, and so on and so on. And then you have all the social media part. And here, when you're looking for a tool, you need to make sure that your platforms are going to be able to cover all these things and that they do it well. Doing it well means being able to do it globally. So obviously, if you want to be able to have information, you need to be able to understand all these different languages. So 187 languages is the number of languages that are recognized today, and 196 countries would be some of the important metrics that you need to keep in mind. You need, and this is a little bit techy, but you need to make sure as well that your technology provider has their own crawling technology, meaning that they are in charge of getting all that data out there online. This way, if there's something missing, you can just ask them to add it. These are some of the very important things. Also, doing both text and visual analytics. We're going to see that later with examples how important this is. You need to make sure as well that your platform can combine things. So online is good, but it's important to be able to look at TV, to be able to look at the radio, to be able to look at print as well. So the offline part is just as important as the online part, and being able to put all of this in one comprehensive picture will be critical to your success when you're looking at influencer marketing or other things that are going to be online related. It's good, I see heads nod, so apparently it makes sense. All right, little checklist. Checklist of things to look at. 360 coverage, online. Twitter official partner, very important. That's an accreditation that says that you have all the data that you need. Make sure that, check the Instagram and Pinterest coverages. These, for some providers, are just little boxes that they're trying to tick, but this is very important. Just check it, test it. Make sure that the offline part is there. Make sure that image recognition is there. Logos, that the machine can understand logos, can understand landscapes, can understand what's happening on the picture. Make sure that the coverage is very clean, and here fake news is part of it, but it's also make sure that you don't care about bots, fake put to the side. Clicks chases are a pain in the travel industry. People that just put 1,000 hashtags just to be able to try to get clicks, but that nobody really look at. Global coverage, and your provider needs to have their own crawling technology and very strong Boolean operators. So this is a part that is very important. You have a lot of data. You need to be able to sift through all this data and get only what's relevant to you. And Boolean operators, it's like the and, or, and things like this, to be able to make sure that you go from 300 billion data to just 1 million that is interesting to you. That's very important. So I'm going to I'm not going to go through all this because of time, but if you have questions after, please feel free to just reach out to me directly or send an email, and be more than happy to show you what that looks like. All right, so now we have all this data, and what we need to do is finding the right influences.
So how do we go about finding the right influences? Switching off the slide. Most of you might be familiar with this concept of 1-9-90 when it comes to influences. There's a vast majority of people that use the internet in a very passive way, reading articles, reading tweets, and so on, not really engaging with them, staying very passive, but consuming information. That's by far the largest part, and that's usually the 90, give or take. The 9. Those are people who engage with content but don't really generate new and fresh content themselves. The smallest part are the people that actually put new stuff on the internet, whether they blog or tweet or they're on YouTube or whatever it may be. But if they add new content, then they belong to this small group up there. Now, there used to be the model used to be that in influencer marketing, you really have to go after that tiny group, the producers of content. Those are the people that will make all the difference. If as a company, as an organization, with a need to get your message out there, if you get somebody else to create your message and pass on your message, then that's really the holy grail. Whereas now things have changed a little bit, and this group of the 9, the people that share and redistribute information in their networks, are seen as equally as important. I think it's the combination of these two things together that really make a big difference. Now, here's an inverted pyramid, which I think is also quite relevant. And this for me is a nice visualization of the difference between what I would describe as paid promotion on the one hand, which is still closer to advertising than it really is to PR, and organic influence on the other hand. So at the top of that inverted pyramid, you really have people with a very large reach. They may be celebrities like Justin Bieber on there. They may be professional publishers also. But as you drop down in that inverted pyramid, you come closer to personal social connections. So that's where the whole idea of reach flips into more personal influence. Now again, I think it's about optimizing the balance between the two things, but in a sense, I think it's important to understand that reach alone won't make the difference. You really have to understand how communities form around certain topics and issues. So there are 5 key factors that we take into account when we do these sort of influencer analytics. A lot of this being based on the content that we can gather from third parties, mainly Talkwalker as a partner. And then we really try to classify influence around the idea of relevance. So do they, in this case, we looked at sustainable tourism and responsible travel. Do they post a lot about these themes? There's the credibility. So are they people, does their profile show that there's actually some sort of connection to that theme? Consistency is another one. So do they just publish once, or do they publish on a fairly regular basis? That makes a difference. Then there's engagement. So do other people actually engage with their content or not? And then finally, there's the overall network. So how connected are they to other people in their narrower and wider network? And so and doing this right really requires, I think, a combination, a hybrid approach of technology on the one hand, the best possible content with the best possible metrics, and human understanding of the topics that we're dealing with. So that's essentially, the way we operate. So the approach that we're taking is very much like, when you think of this traditional marketing funnel, where first of all you need to generate awareness, then you get interest of people, and then you desire and action, and so on. Now, there's a similar funnel in a sense when we go through the operational processes of getting to influencers. So we're starting with vast amounts of content. Then we start to cut into that content by different languages, for example. We go in with certain keywords to identify the pieces we want to look at. We can do that by different channels and geographies. And as we whittle through that data, then at some point we really come to a point where the most relevant ones come to the top. And the processes that we go through there is really, there needs to be a close connection with the client. We need to understand what the specific needs are that need to be addressed with such a project. We then sit down and really define the keywords in a very, very specific way. So for the examples that you'll see in a second, this was all about areas of sustainability and being a responsible citizen, combined with anything of a semantic context of travel and tourism related. But the two things had to be together, otherwise we wouldn't have picked the content. Then there's a process of data analysis that's running that will finally give us raw lists of individuals that we then work with, and we cross-reference automatically generated data sets with other reference points. We find additional content, online news, for example. And all of that together then gets us to identifying and profiling individuals. Now, that's the point where it becomes relevant from a influencer marketing perspective. Because once you have those individuals, once you have them profiled, once you understand the channels that they use, the networks in which they operate, the language they use, and the things that they get attracted by. So also not just who might they influence, but also who are they influenced by, and what are the channels and the key topics and so on that those people use. Then you can start forming a picture in a sense, and you have a basis for really formulating a strategy of how to reach out to them, the sort of language that to use. It still comes down to those key elements in marketing communications. You have to get the right message to the right audience at the right time through the right channels. Now, this sort of data approach helps you fine-tune these methods and approaches. And once you have them, once you have engaged with them, you also want to continue understanding how effective your work is, how they use the information, whether or not they stay on topic to a certain extent, and also how to continuously feed them with information to build on that initial stage. So it's really critical in a sense to have this combination of machine data on the one hand and then real human insight on the other. But tools help us a lot. Tools help us, for example, when it comes to geotagged data, to really see where key conversations are happening. This is probably not very good to read overall, but just to give you an idea, so this is about English language. This is a heat map, as we call it, of conversations around responsible and sustainable tourism and where those conversations are happening. So you've got a clear focus on Western Europe here. You've got a clear focus on East Coast US, West Coast a little bit. And then you've got some pockets, Cape Town, Southeast Asia, and so on. We did a similar exercise for the concept of over-tourism. So that's the topic of certain destinations just being overrun with people, and that sort of undermining the cultural value and the touristic value of those locations. So again, you get places like Cape Town and Sydney, you get London, New York, and so on. You get this green dot in India. I assume everybody knows what that might be. Any volunteers? Taj Mahal. I should give you a prize now. I forgot to bring one. Bad preparation. So, but let's really go a little bit deeper into the data. So we harvested a year's worth of social media data. And for this kind of visualization, we focused specifically on Twitter. The tools that we have access to still don't allow to fully synthesize and aggregate all these different data points from different platforms into one visualization tool. That'll be the next generation that I think we'll be working on. So this is a Twitter influence map of sorts that's looking only at individual accounts with more than 5,000 followers. What we wanted to do here is really to look at a year's worth of tweets. You get hundreds of millions of conversations, even if you limit it to a topic like sustainable tourism. But what we did is to really just look at accounts with more than 5,000 followers. There had to be at least one retweet, and there had to be at least 5 tweets about this topic of sustainable development and sustainable tourism. And the size of these bubbles, that really represents the degree of connectivity across the network. So you can already see there's a really strong one up here, and then some other significant ones. So we zoomed into this a little bit more, and we started looking at just those accounts that had, at least 5 connections to other members of that network, as it were. And that still didn't give us enough focus on key ones. So we said, okay, let's up this to 10 times, the number of connections within the network. So at that point, it became more manageable, and we could look into some of the individuals within that. So we found this gentleman, Stephen Duggan, who's an eco-blogger. He has a lot of followers. He's got 49,000 followers because he's a journalist. He also has a lot of distribution through his channels, and he republishes a lot of his stuff on his Twitter feed, of course. There's another one, also a journalist, a lady from the UK. She publishes a lot on the BBC website. But then we found a slightly smaller dot. And when we looked through the data, and we looked not just at Twitter, but also different channels and so on, we did manual comparisons by looking at the same handle on different platforms. So on Instagram, we could find it. We could find it on Facebook as well, and so on. They really stood out, and they stood out because there was a lot of direct interaction with this particular network. So when we visualize that in a slightly different way, we can see them at the heart of this. I think Valentin said it looks like a peacock. So this data peacock has really this couple of highly active online travelers with a very strong focus on ecological tourism at the heart of this network. So again, we make this a little bit more visible by looking at more connections. And we can see that they're also strongly connected to another couple with more than 100,000 followers. And bear in mind, this is all within one very tight-knit community that we managed to filter out of a sort of Twitter flow of over a year. As a marketer that wants to get messages across in the context of sustainable, responsible tourism, I would look at that and I would say, okay, so now at this point, I really want to have profiled every single one of these nodes. I need to have information about all of them because I want to start communicating with that network. Whether I do that in a direct, active way, or whether or not I understand better the themes that they share and what they communicate about, and so I put messages out there that resonate. I guess that's open whether or not to take an active or a passive approach. But this really allows to get very specific messages to a very tightly knit community with a lot of spreading effect potentially. So that's one of the key purposes of looking at data in that way. So this is then the detailed profile of them. So we can see down here, there's strong followers on Twitter, strong followers on Facebook. So this is a social media footprint that's very comprehensive across all the different channels, which makes them a very, very powerful sort of network node and redistributor of information. And they're also very, very visual. So their Instagram feed has great imagery from all the places that they are traveling to. So when it comes to visuals and visual storytelling and how to harvest data in that context, I need to hand over to the expert again because Valentin knows a lot more about that than I do.
Thank you. Okay, so some more examples. Before we go into the other examples, because this is going to be very advanced now. So I would just like to press the pause button for a second and just go through the takeaways so far. So among the important things, one is that humans are still relevant. So the machine is great. Okay, the machine is great, but humans are needed. And so this is another takeaway. You need to start with understanding why you want to do influencer marketing. You need to set goals, so that after, together with the technology and your consultants, you will be able to put a strategy together to achieve these goals, and not just look for influencers because you need to do it. Because this is so these goals are really instrumental, because if you're looking for visibility, you might just look for influencers with a very high reach. If you're looking to get money out of things and really being able to influence the people you speak to, so actually they buy your product or they go towards the services that you provide, then you probably need to reach the influencers. Remember there was an inverted pyramid before, and there was mom at the very bottom. So you need to find, if you want to find the mom influencers, it's going to be different from finding the Justin Bieber influencers. And so it's very important to start with the goal setting. All right. And so obviously the tool is important, but humans are really important. So now let's go into the more advanced stuff that is fun. All right, so this is a cool story. So you see this lady, you might have seen that post. She traveled every country. She's so great. And here you see that visual thing that looks like the head massage tool. Yeah, right. So this is a virality map. So it shows you how it went from one post to getting viral everywhere. And so when you're on the platform and you're trying to understand your influencer network, you can start hovering over these big bubbles. These big bubbles are people that manage to be a springboard for your message and really manage to make sure that you increase the engagement a lot of your messages. If you start understanding this and be quite disciplined with this exercise, you will be able to create a blueprint for successful messages, where you will understand who you need to reach out to make sure that you get the engagement and you get the visibility that you're looking for. So that's an example. Something that image recognition can bring to you. So obviously we talked about it. Images are very, very important, and there are a lot of them, and you don't have time to go through all of them one by one. And here the machine can recognize all this much quicker than you ever will for you. So let's say here you could look for, Thailand, and then with image recognition you will be able to understand if it's more beaches or more jungles or more indoor or more outdoor activity that are promoted or that your users are using, so with user-generated content. By the way, does anybody know what a rostrum is? Oh yeah, good job. Yes, it's a stage basically. It's like this type of thing. Right, good job. We had to look it up before the presentation. So we don't have much time left, but there's one lady that I know that Thomas loves talking about.
Yeah, so we label this whole thing organic influence as a new paradigm as opposed to paid promotion. Now, within influencer marketing in tourism, I think the paid promotion thing, will not go away quickly. And on channels like Snapchat, for example, this lady Valeria is what's being described as a Snapchat sensation. I think as an Instagram sensation. Snapchat sensations will be the next thing. We used to have YouTube sensations and so on. So there's obviously something about her visual appearance that makes her, very interesting for marketers. It's not just a visual appearance. It's also, she's a very savvy lady. She used to work as a banker. She's now an eco-focused travel blogger. and I think she makes good money by, you know, having these very, very active, you know, highly visual Instagram accounts. And this is still something that allows us, you know, the tools that we have at our disposal allow us to profile these individuals in these accounts and engage with them in a very sophisticated way. But, you know, as we do this, I think we can already see the shift away from that paid promotion perspective, much more to organic influence. So, one way in which we can leverage, again, the data tools that we have is drill into the language that's being used. This is very, very difficult to read, but just to give you an idea, the bubbles are different media channels. So one of these, the largest bubble is Facebook on here, then online news is fairly large, Twitter is fairly large. And what we can filter out, you know, from the content that we're looking at is the frequency with which certain words are being used. And that's, of course, partly dependent on the search queries that you're using, but it also allows you to see differences, you know, within these media channels. And again, this is something that helps fine-tuning messages in marketing communications and PR, having a better understanding of language as it's being used here. So we've got 3 more slides to come, and then maybe we have a few minutes for questions. I said at the beginning we did an analysis in English language when we also did it in Arabic. Now, we tried to use the same search query that we did for English in Arabic, which was this combination of the idea of responsibility and sustainability with tourism and travel. But that didn't really generate enough of a data set to work with, which I think is an interesting finding in a sense, because it does mean that, you know, with regards to, let's say, the maturity of the discourse in a way, that doesn't seem to be happening yet in Arabic when it comes to these sorts of themes. So we had to change our tack slightly, and we just looked at online conversations around sustainability, and then we found a lot of stuff. It was just not directly related to travel, which probably points to an opportunity in that space over the next few years, and also in the run-up to Expo, perhaps. So we found lots of content when we looked at sustainability, and we then zoomed in onto just 3 of them as examples. So this gentleman, Mohammed Al-Shehi, is a law professor, so he writes a lot about ecological issues in a legal context. We found some examples, and again, why does he matter? Now, he has a fairly strong social media footprint, very engaged followership, and so on. There's a second one. I'm beginning to struggle with my pronunciation now. Musab Al-Tenaji. Also an Emirati blogger. He's also involved in Abu Dhabi sustainability. So there's kind of a, probably through his formal role, you know, he's very engaged in the subject matter. And then the final one that we found relevant for this discussion is Ali Najim is an architect, and he works a lot and then also publishes a lot through his Twitter channel around sustainability, you know, sustainability in construction and, you know, renewable energy efficiency, and so on, related topics. So that's the material that we had. It's really just an introduction, in a sense, into the topic. What I would love to do at some point is really delve deep into those issues around sustainable tourism on particular markets, and really do a fully fledged study. And that's probably coming next. So that's us done. Any questions, comments? Anybody have anything to add, say? I hope you could hear us okay, because I get a lot of ambient noise coming from outside. There's a question at the back.
I have a question on bots, because all of us, can you all hear me?
I can.
You can hear me? You can hear me?
Now I can.
Okay, so I have a question on bots, BOTS. So basically, when you post an ad, you don't know whether it reaches the right people, because we were told there are a lot of these bots that increase the number of clicks, or the number of, you're not seeing real people click on it. What is, yeah.
Yeah,
okay.
great question. And also giving us a great pathway to say why it is so important to combine automation and human insight. Now, the whole problem around bots became very, very visible last year around Brexit and after Brexit, and also when it came to the US elections. People were looking at how it was possible that fake news disseminated so quickly into the more traditional online media channels. And what they found was entire armies of bots being leveraged to push messages out. And so that brings people that work on the technical side of internet analytics and so on to look a lot deeper into the problem. I heard people quote things like more than 50% of all online traffic is generated by bots. Now, that's not all evil bots. There are tools where bots actually operate in a relatively simple way in answering questions on call centers and so on. That can work in very simple ways. But there is a big problem out there that machines alone can't address. Now, the way in which we're drilling into data here and information is actually that allows you to get deeper into identifying and almost ring fencing communities where these are real people talking to each other. That's not something that works on just reach metrics on a wider scale, because that's where you face that problem. But technically, there is no simple solution for this right now. There are tools out there that do bot identification. They are quite good, but it's almost like an arms race. The more you develop that technology, then the bot developers have already moved on. So it's difficult. It's a very fluid environment. Any other questions? Oh yes. So if you want the presentation, just come to us and talk to us. Give us your business cards or something, and then we'll just mail it to you. We're happy to do that. Thanks for your attention.